Okay, hello everybody. So today we're going to talk more about the communicative classroom. And to do that, we have to talk still about communicative competence. So remember Del Himes and communicative competence, the concept of what it means to know a language and to put it to use in a community of people in a variety of ways. And so later, Cannell and Swain started talking about the components of communicative ability. And so let's take a look at this insert they have here. They have linguistic competence, pragmatic competence, discourse competence, strategic competence, and fluency. So English language teaching has addressed fluency in different kinds of ways. We use chain drills, for example, as one, or we can use chunking or gambits. I'd like to agree with that a bit. I'd like to add to that. One of the things we need to think about is what are the issues for the communicative curriculum when you're teaching a content class and you have to follow a content curriculum? How can you make it more communicative? How do we define communicative tasks? How do we practice communication? How do we use natural language and fluency activities, with fluency being a pattern of language activity and interactions in class which models competent performers in mother tongue in real life? So how do we achieve a balance of form and function and negotiate meaning? There are all kinds of things to consider: age, the stage of learning, the existence proficiency level, and how to integrate those levels in a unit or lesson in a diverse classroom, and how to balance and organize different types of activities. One of the things that I need to mention here is that to achieve fluency, language is focused on meaning, not so much as form. The content is determined by the learner in the speaking and writing, and the learner is the one who is formulating and producing. There is always negotiation of meaning, interpreting meaning from what your learner hears and constructing a response, and learning to be autonomous and not totally reliant on the teacher or the materials. And what the learner hears should not be predictable. Another thing is that all four skills should be in play. Students practice and develop strategic competence by using all four skills. Teacher intervention should be minimal. So what kinds of activities can you do in the classroom for students to be able to negotiate meaning? So let's look a little bit at some activities. I will say them and write them as well. One of the activities that you can try for is info gaps activities, very popular. Pair work with partners having different parts of a message. And so they have the same text, but the messages are gapped in different ways, so they have to read to each other. That's a really nice activity that you can do with your students. Another kind of activity that you can do is a reasoning. We call it a reasoning gap activity. And that is deriving new information from given information. For example, looking at a teacher's timetable and analyzing on the basis of that timetable the given class time schedules. So that's another thing where you sort of have to do reasoning and thinking exercises, making predictions and inferences by looking at the data. It's a good exercise. Can be used in all kinds of content classes. A third one is what I would call an opinion gap activity. That's when students are articulating and identifying a particular preference or feeling or an attitude. They complete a story, they have discussions about issues, social issues, political issues, historical issues, and they give their opinion. So, let me erase this, okay? Okay, here we go. So how do our learners use the activities that they are provided with? Do different ways of exploring the materials provide different opportunities for learning? For example, if there's time pressure, the emphasis might be more on communication, fluency versus accuracy. So how could we help our learners to be more accurate? give them more time, less pressure. Maybe the teacher rewrites the student's text, and then the students can compare the two versions so that you can teach students to do noticing differences activities. Some educators promote accuracy as more heavy for beginners, and so as proficiency increases, more fluency tasks are added. Others use 50-50 ratios from the start. This is really your call. The present, practice, produce is one attempt to achieve integration, but students cannot really be controlled in learning. They will use language as they wish, and their styles and speeds of learning may vary. So how can we manage to make our classroom communicative? Well, the first thing is, let me write this down, collaboration. So that's small groups. And then we have socio-psychological factors, culture, past teachers, and age are affecting, so understanding those factors. We can also try to build cohesion, to build group cohesion, a sense of community, a sense of classroom. We also have to think about the way that our groups are paired up, so that you pair students so that they're comfortable with each other as much as possible, and understanding any cultural differences or gender differences that have to do with making groups. We also need to manage the learning by being very efficient and organized in what we do. This means setting up the activities, organizing the materials, and guiding the students, encouraging, monitoring, and assessing in ways where you have actually a plan of what you're doing. Training teachers in group work is very helpful, because if you learn to do group work yourself, then you can help train students to do group work. It's kind of like the cart before the horse. Unless you understand group work, how are you going to teach your students to do group work? So let's, here at this page, this is an activity that you might be interested in, and take a look at it. Here, if I can make it bigger. Doesn't look like I can make it bigger. So this is a bunch of postcards, and it's a jigsaw activity. So what the students will do is they will have to put these cards together and understand what is going on. It's also something that's relevant to students because they are talking about something that's personal and interesting to students. So here we go further with jigsaw activity by now taking the worksheet. So label as much of the map as you can and fill in the table as much as you can. So by looking at those cards, reading, those are actually kind of like primary source documents. Now they are actually engaging in an activity where they have to collaborate and cooperate with each other, because different groups have different cards, and figure out the camp and what's going on in that camp. Pretty interesting activity, huh? There is all sorts of ways that you can keep moving with activities of that type. So here is group work explained in terms of the tasks. So the teacher explains, and then the learners listen, and the teacher manages. Then the teacher organizes, the students go in groups, and the teacher organizes. Students work in groups, and then the teacher is now the guide. So it's the gradual release of responsibility. And then the teacher organizes again in groups, and the students exchange information, and then they get back together and do a whole class check with feedback. So the teacher goes from organizer to guide, monitor, diagnoser, and feedback giver or evaluator. It's a very nice progression of the teacher, and it also shows your various roles in terms of the classroom. So let me see if I can move that down. So let's talk a little bit now about what does the communicative language teaching approach imply for authenticity in the classroom? Well, we want authentic materials and authentic tasks. This has actually been controversial because reading and listening to authentic stuff is really hard. We have to take into consideration that prior knowledge has great impact. So we need to think about the prior knowledge of our students. We also have to think about the relevance of the text. And then we have to know about how these students have experience making sense of text, and then whether the texts are relevant or appropriate. I can read my writing. Appropriate to the task that you're asking students to do. So all of those things are good to consider in terms of authentic materials. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't differentiate materials, but the closer we are to real life, a lot of scholars are really advocating authentic text. But I think at some point in time you should differentiate. What kind of issues do we have in applying communicative approaches to content and language teaching? First of all, there's the teacher confidence. Are you confident in what you're doing? And do you understand the methodology? Then you have to consider your authorities. Will your school allow you to do this? You have to consider also the compatibility between the existing teaching philosophy and innovative stuff. What are the relative advantages of innovating in this way? And then the culture. Is the culture that you're addressing in your classroom, will the diversity in your classroom allow for you to do a lot of communicative things in the classroom? So let's take a look at this next one. What is a good learner? Here is a list of many things that represent a good learner. And this is what we want to help our students become, is a good learner. So we have to think about learner autonomy and learner training. What are the aims of the task? What is suitable for the learners? What would be a sensible procedure? We have to think about what kind of learners we have. What is a self-directed learner, and how much support do you give to each student? What are the language learning strategies that you know and that your students know? And I would say a language learning strategy is any set of operation sets, plans, or routines used by a learner to facilitate, obtain, store, retrieve, and use information. So learners have to learn to do learning, and they have to learn to regulate their learning. So basically that means that they have to use two sets of strategies: cognitive strategies and metacognitive strategies. The cognitive strategies have to do with analogy, memorizing, visual stuff, reading, writing, sounding things out, repetition, inferencing, predicting, and guessing. Metacognitive strategies have to do with planning for thinking about the learning, self-monitoring, and self-evaluation. In addition to cognitive and metacognitive strategies, there is also communicative strategies. Communicative strategies: gesture, mime, synonyms, paraphrasing, and use of cognate words. And we also have socio-affective strategies. This means initiating conversations with native speakers, collaboration skills, listening, watching TV, internet, radio, and using language labs if they're around. So all of these things have to do with the different kinds of language learning strategies that we have to rely on. Research into learner strategies has found that, and I'm sure you know this already as experienced teachers, research has shown that semantic mapping and brainstorming is really effective, as well as experience test relationship. It's called ETR, and that would mean students discuss the experiences that relate to their topic or text. They read the text, and then they draw out relationships between their prior knowledge and experience and the content of the text. So this is like activating the background. If you're a teacher, you have to instruct, regulate, and assess, and your learner has to absorb and receive. But be aware that there's always a hidden curriculum. We must be cognizant about our learners' perceptions about learning, their role in learning, the nature of the subject studied, the nature of the teacher, and attitudes towards school, authority, and information. from your part as a teacher and from their part as students. Illich said a long time ago, I think it was in the 70s, that schools are designed as if there is a secret to everything in life. You must learn the secret in orderly successions, and only teachers can give you that information. That's no longer true because of modern technology. So it's a very interesting thing to think about. The other thing is that teachers are no longer the sole authorities. They're no longer the sole authority of anything at all with technology and YouTube and all kinds of media. So it went from teachers directing classes and students warming seats, you get the information and the A, to becoming a school based on self-directed learners, which is now the ideal in our system. So what are the implications for learner training in class? Learners must learn to strategically invest in their processes so they can use psychological and practical training. So they need to understand the process of learning how to learn as well as learning content. So what kind of activities can you do to help your learners to reflect on learning? I guess one of the first things you can do is to have your students self-assess before, during, and after. You can have them make personal recordings about their strengths and weaknesses. You can have them fill out learning style questionnaires. Activities that would train our students in learning strategies. What kind of activities would that be? So we have those bottom-up and top-down strategies, and we have students with metacognitive strategies that they can use where they're talking about their process. And the metacognitive strategies would include paying attention, planning, setting goals, organizing, seeking out practice activities, and then again, self-assessing. There is ideas for reading journals. Let's see here. Is that the reading journal idea? Let's see. Yes, this is a great little tip. Having your students, any kind of student actually, keep a reading journal. So I'll leave that up there for you to look at. You can encourage your learners to self-monitor, measure the extent that they've mastered something. Instead of getting the grade from you, they tell you the grade they deserve. They can have peers assess them with the same rubric. And then you can compare and ask each other, was I clear? Did I ask my peer to repeat or clarify if I was telling him something or conveying information in a certain way? Am I happy with my performance? Okay, so let's take a document here. This is a kind of a self-assessment document that you might want to look at, that students could use when they're assessing each other and assessing themselves. Okay, so what role can self-assessed facilities play in language learning? So English Club, extra written materials, the library, the internet, the radio, social media, games, exam preparation. All of these facilities are useful for language learning, and all of them can allow students to self-assess each other. Okay, so let's move on a little bit. Let me give you an example of a pair game. So students would look at two pictures. The pictures are identical, but certain things are missing. And then they would find the differences between their two pictures. Like if you had a picture of a living room and one picture had a lamp and another didn't, one had a little kitty and another didn't. So they would look at the pictures and try to find out what is missing. Remember that scholars are always debating the term learner autonomy. It means several things. It means that students are prepared to work with systems and pathways in using self-access facilities. It means that learners are aware of ways to find language learning opportunities. And it means that learners are taught strategies for working with teachers and working with their peers. So here's a couple of discussion questions that you might want to think about. Okay. These are 6 really good ways a teacher can promote learner independence. I'm wondering how many of these ways you would want to try to use in your classroom. Okay. Let's move on and look at this questionnaire. So if you had if you had a questionnaire here, and then your student was filling things out, you would be reading, or they would be researching using different kinds of media to answer questions, and so they would have an ability to work on their own and be autonomous. Let's take a look at another page here. Here's Superman and smoking, reading information transfer. So here we have Superman, and here's the aim, the preparation, and then you read the text and fill out a questionnaire associated with the text. Pretty interesting. So, and then they would discuss their own attitudes and opinions on smoking as well. So there are all different kinds of materials that you can use for helping students to be more communicative and to have a communicative classroom. So I hope this helps a little bit, and there'll be more to come.